Hey sixth graders, today's video is teaching you all about how to simplify ratios. Now, if you notice with some of my examples today, they look just like fractions because we can choose to write ratios as fractions. So as long as you remember how to simplify fractions, you already know how to simplify ratios. It just might look a little bit different depending on how the ratio is written. So we're going to start with two example problems. So the first example is a ratio that I wrote and it's called 6/8 or 6 to 8. And I also included a picture for those of you that kind of like to see the math happening. So what this ratio is it's a part to whole ratio. The 6 represents the 6 circles in my picture, and the 8 represents the whole or the total amount of shapes, which is 8 altogether. Now, this relationship is representative of the picture, but it's not in simplest form. Sometimes what we can do is we can simplify a ratio so that the numbers get smaller, but the relationship between the numbers stays the same. And that's why it's called an equivalent ratio. When we simplify, it has the same worth or value, but the numbers got smaller. So what we're going to do is we are going to choose a number to divide by. So if I look at 6 and 8, I have to think, what number of a math fact do they have in common? What factor do they have in common? And because they're both even, I first see a 2 fact. Now, we're going to divide both parts by 2. And what this is doing is this is cutting them in half. And this would be like cutting my picture in half. So I'm going to draw a line here and just cut the picture in half. And we're really just looking at half of my picture, and because of the way I drew it, I cut them in half evenly. I have 3 circles on the top and 3 on the bottom, and 1 square on the top and 1 square on the bottom. So when I divided my picture, I made sure the relationships stayed equivalent. So what this would be over here, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. And what this does is it simplifies my ratio. So instead of saying the relationship is 6 to 8, I could also simplify and say 3 to 4. And my picture shows this because when I cut my picture in half, there are 3 circles out of 4 total shapes when I cut it in half evenly. So it's another way to talk about the relationship of the circles to total in a simplified or smaller set of objects. Let's try this with another number. So if I have, let's say this is part to part. So I have a recipe and it calls for 28 cups of one ingredient and 60 cups of another ingredient. That sounds like a huge recipe. So I want to simplify it and just make a smaller recipe that maybe can just feed me or my small family. So instead of making this huge recipe with 28 cups and 60 cups of something else, I want to simplify that recipe. I don't want to make that much, but I still want the recipe to taste the same. So the relationship between these ingredients still need to be the same relationship. So I need to find numbers that go into 28 and 60. It's really hard when the numbers are big, so I'm just going to go with what I see. I see 2 even numbers. I'm going to cut them in half. There's more than one way you could do this. If you saw another math fact, you could divide by something else as long as it works for both numbers. So when I cut 28 in half, that is 14. And when I cut 60 in half, that is 30. Now, I can't just be done until I check to see if I can simplify some more. 14 and 30 are both even numbers again. So I think I can divide by 2 in a second step. Okay. So if I divide by 2 again, I get 7 on top and 15. Now, if I look at 7 and 15, I don't see any other math facts or factors that they have in common. So my simplified recipe would be 7 cups of the first ingredient and 15 cups of the next ingredient. And because I did the same thing to both numbers in the ratio, I know that my recipe is going to taste the same. Before we go on to our freebies today, I wanted to let you know that today's code word is winter. W-I-N-T-E-R. Today's code word is winter. Now on to some freebies. So what we're going to do now is these are some freebies from your slides for today. So if you have your slides open, you can use them at the same time we're doing these freebies, or you can just jot them down on some scrap paper since you have to show your work today anyways. Here's some freebies. Card A says the ratio 30 to 54, but we need to move that card to a different spot on the slide by simplifying. So let's see what 30 and 54 have in common. They're both even, but I'm wondering if there might be another math fact. So instead of dividing by 2 and taking a couple steps to get there, I'm going to see if there's a bigger number. Oh, I see a 6 fact. So I'm going to try and divide by 6. And whatever you do to one number, you do the same thing to the other number. So 30 divided by 6 is 5, and 54 divided by 6 is 9. So I got 5 to 9. Now what you're going to do on your slides today is you're going to see if there's a category or a group that has a ratio of 5 to 9. And it might look like a fraction. It could look like colon form, or it could be word form. So remember, all of these mean the same thing. So you have to kind of look and see which format it's looking for. Okay, so the next freebie that we're going to do is letter B. Now we have a 27 and a 45. I see a 3's fact, but I'm going to always search for something bigger if I can, because I like to do things quicker in one step rather than 2 or more steps. I see a 9's fact. So I'm going to divide by 9 and see if I can get to the simplified ratio quicker. Okay. 27 divided by 9 is 3, and 45 divided by 9 is 5. 3 to 5, or 3/5 is good. So what I would do is I'd move card B over to the category that has a 3 to 5 ratio. Remember, it can be written like this as well. So it kind of just depends on which format we're using. That one was done as well. Okay, my last freebie is card C. Now this ratio is written a little bit differently. So it doesn't look like a fraction. So you have some options. You can rewrite it like a fraction if you'd like. So some people start with their first number on top, 64, and 16 goes on the bottom. And then they simplify it. So that's one way to do it. Or you can just keep it the way that it is written. And you can just do the same thing you would do for a fraction. So when I'm simplifying a fraction, I'm going to divide these pieces by a math fact. And whatever I do to one, I want to also do to the next one. So what I see is I see an 8 fact. So as long as I divide one side by 8 and the other number on the other side by 8, I know my ratio is going to be equivalent in the end. So 64 divided by 8 is 8. I'm going to bring down this word 2. And 16 divided by 8 is 2. Now I've got to see, am I done or can I go another step? When I look at an 8 and a 2, oh my goodness, they're even. So I can still keep dividing. So I'm going to divide these by 2, and I'm going to simplify even more. So when I do 8 divided by 2, I get 4. And then I'm going to bring down my word 2, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So my final simplified ratio is 4 to 1. Now remember, we can write this as 4 over 1 or 4:1 in case you see that in a couple different ways. So feel free to move card C to the group that matches a 4 to 1 ratio when it's simplified. Today, your job is to continue practicing simplifying these ratios. If you like thinking of them as fractions and you want to write them as fractions because that's what you're comfortable with, go for it. Otherwise, you can keep them in their format and just pick the number that you're going to divide both pieces by. Good luck and do your best.